Well, now to some breaking news. CBS News has learned that U.S. intelligence believes Iran is preparing a major attack in retaliation for Monday's airstrike by Israel on the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Now, the U.S. has warned Iran in writing not to attack U.S. personnel and facilities. CBS's David Martin is at the Pentagon with these new developments.
Iran's supreme leader held funeral prayers for the Revolutionary Guards killed by an Israeli airstrike, as both the U.S. and Israel braced for a retaliatory attack. U.S. officials tell CBS News Iran is making preparations to launch a swarm of drones and missiles timed around the upcoming end of Ramadan. The target is still unknown, but Israel is reinforcing its air defenses. The ways of retaliating can come from anywhere, including Iran, Israel's defense minister said, and we are preparing to face this matter.
I think Iran will cast about for a relatively vulnerable target, perhaps an embassy somewhere abroad, something like that, maybe a ship at sea.
Retired General and former Mideast Commander Frank McKenzie says Monday's Israeli strike against the Iranian diplomatic compound in the Syrian capital of Damascus was the most significant Israeli attack against Iranians since the war in Gaza began.
It's a very precisely directed strike that took out key leadership, and I think it's hurt them quite a bit.
2 senior generals were among the 7 killed in what Iran considered to be an attack on its sovereign territory. Caught the U.S. as much by surprise as it did Iran, even though it was carried out by an American-built F-35 stealth fighter. The U.S. was quick to disavow any connection.
We were not notified by the Israelis about their strike or the intended target of their strike in Damascus.
Still, Iran has vowed to hold the U.S. as well as Israel accountable, and American troops throughout the Middle East have been put on high alert that they too might be attacked in coming days. Nora?
David Martin, thank you very much for that new reporting.
The United States appears to be heading into financial oblivion as Sell America is picking up steam. Treasuries are becoming outrageous for the U.S. to the point where we may be unable to service its debt. The dollar is also falling in value, and you have experts saying, the stock market can go up all at once, but if the dollar is losing value as it has been, some economists say that the increase doesn't really matter. Right? When this deadly combo happened last week, Trump suspended the trade war with China. And when it happened last month, he paused the so-called reciprocal tariffs. Now, he may be out of levers because some on Wall Street are saying that the problem isn't just his policies, it's him. Right? And this also comes as the US's credit rating was downgraded from perfect for the first time since 1917 by Moody's, with seeing investors and the credit rating downgrade both being cited to the new budget that Congress is trying to pass. A budget that appears will add trillions of dollars to the deficit, right? It cuts taxes for the richest of Americans, raises them on the poorest while not meaningfully reducing spending. And all of their supposed spending cuts that they're using to make this bill not seem so bad, they're reportedly backloaded to happen after 2028, so they'll never actually happen. And so you have people noting, Trump ran on balancing the budget, and yet it appears he's doing the complete opposite here, with experts saying this will increase the deficit by $3 trillion. And under this bill, on a dynamic basis, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget says it's set to go from $36 trillion to at least $53 trillion. And increasing the deficit that much while Treasury rates are soaring is selling off its young people's lives to give immediate gains to the old. This is exactly why we have $36 trillion in debt. Right? The Center for American Progress found that the Bush-era tax cuts and Trump's tax cuts are responsible for more than 90% of the increase in the national debt as a percentage of GDP. In fact, many believe that had no tax cuts happened at all, the U.S. wouldn't have a debt problem. Right? And with all this, you had Scott Galloway writing a while back, "We've broken the social contract that binds America. Hard work, play by the rules, and you'll be better off than your parents were." For the first time in our nation's history, this is no longer true. D.C. has become a cross between The Walking Dead and the Golden Girls. Its denizens see the young as nutrition rather than the future. But for now, let me know your thoughts in those comments and follow.
Hey everyone, well, I am here at the Capitol in the early morning hours of Wednesday in an all-night bonanza in which the Republicans are trying to shove through their reconciliation package. Now, I want to break down what is happening inside the Capitol right now. As you all know, they scheduled for the Rules Committee to begin debate on this package at 1 a.m. So they've been at it all night. And I am here to offer amendments, to fight back. Democrats are inside this building right now fighting this bill. And what is insane is that for hours, the Republicans have been debating that this was an emergency, so they had to have this all-night hearing. And then their own members didn't show up for the rules debate. Literally. Like, a bunch of them aren't even in the room. But I want to break down what is actually inside this bill, because the bill is even worse than we thought it was going to be. And in fact, because they were still cutting last minute deals up until the end, many of the provisions hadn't even been finalized until the Rules Committee gavelled in. And we didn't get a CBO score on it until late into the night. So let me break it down. I'm going to give you 5 ABCs. First of all, it gives a massive permanent tax breaks to the ultra wealthy and to corporations by re-upping the 2017 tax cuts that put our country on a path to a massive deficit spend just last time, and again, they're going to do it again. But this time, the CBO told us late last night that the wealthiest people in this country are going to see their income go up by 4%, while the poorest people in this country are going to see their income go down by 4%. So this is literally a redistribution of wealth from the poorest Americans to the richest Americans. Secondly, there are billions of dollars in giveaways and kickbacks to corporations and buddies of the president and their friends. It includes billions of dollars in contracts for defense spending, for a border wall, for private prisons, for oil and gas companies, doing away with royalties, as well as huge spends on big tech and deregulation. These are all kickbacks for their buddies, and I'm sure you all know who. The third is cuts. There are massive cuts in this bill, including to Medicaid, even more than they anticipated, according to the CBO. We're talking over $690 billion in cuts to Medicaid alone, and that does not include the cuts to the Affordable Care Act and the massive increase in spending that's going to have to be taken up by states to cover many uninsured people. It also cuts food assistance to millions of Americans. It would cut school lunch programs, and it would cut Pell Grants and other educational supplements that make it possible for people to go to school. Fourth, it decimates protections for the environment. It opens huge swaths of land to oil and gas drilling, to mining. It does away with key protections in the judiciary for judicial review. It does away with NEPA. It eviscerates funding for tax incentives and climate programs that came out of the IRA. It is one of the worst bills in American history for the environment. It also decimates protections for federal workers. It would make federal workers at will, and it would charge a premium on their retirements, cutting their pay across the board. So basically penalizing our federal employees. It also guts the CFPB, which means that consumer finance protections are also being gutted in this bill. Fifth, it eviscerates the federal budget. I have never heard such ridiculous arguments in my life. Inside this building right now, Republicans are trying to argue that the CBO happens to be wrong sometimes, and therefore their estimates that this bill is going to blow a hole through the deficit by $3.8 trillion, they're arguing can't possibly be right. My friends, it is correct. And in fact, not only is this a huge increase in the deficit, this is the largest increase in deficit spending since the 1790s for this country. And if you look at the tables, what you will see is not only does it massively increase deficit spending, it transfers billions of dollars in costs to the states by cuts to royalties, Medicaid transfers, and food assistance transfers. And so it's not only hitting the federal budget, it's also going to hit our state budgets. This bill is a national disgrace, and they're inside this building trying to pass it in the dark of night, and we are fighting them every step of the way.
Remember these ships stranded off the Los Angeles coast laden with Asian goods not long after COVID hit and the consumption rush was on? Well, here's that same port last week. Not only no Chinese ships because of the Trump tariffs, but some had reportedly dumped cargo overboard, cheaper than bringing it back to Asia. Ships slated to come in May 10th, not even on the horizon. So, a disaster for American consumers, right? One scoop or two?
2 scoops.
I invited economist Dan Bergstresser to my house, serving some hospitable morning Joe, for him to demonstrate what some had feared would be imminent devastation. He promised to show me just how much of a typical American's goods, in this case mine and my wife's, comes on those ships.
And where was that scooper made?
Hold on, I'll find out. Scooper, made in China.
Made in China.
Yep, made in China.
I don't want you to burn yourself looking, but it's very likely that that was also manufactured in China.
Let me check it. I'm a little old for this, but yep, made in China.
Now these mugs, where are they made?
Yep, made in China. As we looked around my kitchen, the toaster.
Toaster, very likely to be made in China.
Yes, we looked it up, Oster, made in China. A blender. This mixer, we looked this up too. This is made in China. Indoor-outdoor thermometer, made in China. The lights used to shoot this very story. Dan, cameraman, where do they come from?
They come from China.
So the typical American consumer is now going to be screwed?
I think people are in for some surprises as the disruptions in trade kind of work their way through the various supply chains that we rely upon.
And even if something wasn't made in China, it sure wasn't just made in America. My air conditioning compressor, for example. Okay, so this is Carrier up in Syracuse, New York. Manufactured in the U.S. from domestic and foreign parts.
Your satisfaction with the experience of using a product is determined by everything kind of has to work, right? If just one piece of your air conditioner or just one piece of an airplane that you're flying on doesn't work, you're going to have a very unsatisfying experience.
Or a disastrous one. We depend on goods or parts from China, and even though a deal has now been struck, it takes containers 30 days from Shanghai to LA, 45 to New York. So, bare shelves for that long? Kids and grandkids bereft come Christmas if toys from Asia fail to arrive early enough? No big deal, said President Trump before the thaw with China.
Maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls, you know? And maybe the 2 dolls will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
Isn't the president right that we just have too much stuff? I sure as heck have too many mugs. So if we have less stuff, we aren't really that much worse off.
For example, we have a lot of mugs in this house. Maybe we could have one fewer mug. And
could have 15 fewer mugs. There are ones that are hidden in some box somewhere, believe me.
But as economists, we think that the consumer knows a lot about what they want. And if you want 15 mugs, that is a thing we should celebrate.
But even if I went haywire and wanted 15 more mugs, why couldn't they be made in this country? Why can't America, given the size of the country, the number of people we have here, the advanced technology that we have here, why can't we go it alone?
First of all, let's suppose that you are a capitalist. You're thinking about building a mug factory in the United States. You're going to spend $100 million to invest in that factory. Your investors are going to insist on a return. No thoughtful investor is going to be keen to build a mug factory on the promise of trade policy that could change tomorrow. He's basically frozen the American investor because all they see is policy that is, it's very hard to get your hands around where things are going to be in a year.
Make no mistake, guys, this is a major victory for the Trump administration and its efforts to carry out what the president has promised will be the largest deportation operation in American history. The Supreme Court's ruling will pave the way for what could be one of the largest terminations of legal status in recent U.S. history. We're talking about 350,000 Venezuelan migrants who, up until this week, were relying on these deportation protections and government-issued work permits under the Temporary Protected Status, or TPS, program that the Trump administration can now terminate. And ICE has not said that they will immediately target this population, but legally speaking, they are now fair game for being arrested and deported from the country. And in terms of why the administration is doing this, its argument is that even though country conditions in Venezuela are still problematic, the country is still in deep political and economic crisis, it is not in the national security interests of the U.S. to continue this policy because it says it attracts illegal immigration and that some of the Venezuelans who benefit from this policy are suspected gang members.
You know, Camilo, when I was based in Chicago, I covered the migrants who were sleeping in police stations, and nearly everyone was Venezuelan. There's just a huge wave of Venezuelan migrants that came to the U.S. If you are one of those people, what does this mean for you? Are you now technically undocumented? Do you need to deport? What does this mean for them?
They're now in legal limbo. Their deportation protections are set to expire, and they will no longer be able to lawfully and legally work in the U.S., so they could be pushed into the underground economy, and they could join the millions of people who are in this country illegally and who can now be arrested by ICE, because the Trump administration has made this point very clear. If you are here illegally, irrespective of whether you are a criminal, you are susceptible and vulnerable to being arrested and deported from the country.
I'm curious about the process here for the Venezuelans under this status. Were they required to be checking in regularly? I mean, in other words, does the government have a likelihood of knowing where they are and where to find them?
Some of them had to check in with ICE regularly, but they all had to submit applications with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, a federal agency overseeing the legal immigration system, and that agency was supposed to vet and screen them for any public safety or national security concerns.